Little Voice is a 1998 comedy drama starring Jane Horrocks, Brenda Blethyn, Ewan McGregor, and Michael Caine. The film revolves around a socially reclusive girl, LV, that lives with her boozy, overbearing mother. When a promoter in a local nightclub discovers her ability for mimicking classic jazz starlets, he does everything he can to make sure LV is his ticket to fame and fortune. On its surface, Little Voice is a charming, light British comedy that doesn't quite match up to its contemporaries like The Full Monty and Four Weddings and a Funeral, but there's a darker side to this kitchen sink comedy that elevates it to a level that I personally think deserves more respect, and should have landed Michael Caine that little gold man. So it's time to hit rewind and see if I can convince you to check out the utterly underrated Having been a mildly successful stage actress through the 80s, including a term playing Sally Bowles in Cabaret opposite Alan Cumming, British actress Jane Horrocks gained attention for her role in the Mike Leigh film Life is Sweet, which coincidentally also features Little Voice co-star Jim Broadbent and original co-star of the play Alison Steadman. Whilst warming up her voice backstage during a production of the stage play Road, playwright Jim Cartwright became aware of Horrocks' uncanny ability to impersonate stars such as Shirley Bassey, Liza Minnelli, and Gracie Fields. So impressed with her talent, Cartwright eventually went on to write Little Voice specifically for Horrocks. In 1992, the play The Rise and Fall of Little Voice, directed by future Oscar-winning director and Horrocks' partner at the time, Sam Mendes, was a Laurence Olivier award-winning success. The role catapulted Horrocks into the British public consciousness, eventually landing her the role of the ditzy bubble in cult sitcom Absolutely Fabulous, and a steady acting career on British TV throughout the 90s. In 1998, an adaptation of the play was filmed, with Horrocks reprising her role as LV. While the film was moderately successful, earning back just over 3 times its $6 million budget worldwide, it would never stand a chance against the big boys shoving their way to the top of the box office, like Saving Private Ryan, Armageddon, and There's Something About Mary. Now, this film is actually a bit of a weird one for me to do a review of retrospectively. As an incredibly awkward and shy teenager in 1998, the feeling of nostalgia I carry for this film is a little overwhelming. I adored this film so much as a kid and really felt a connection with the reclusive LV. I loved it so much that the CD of the movie, which wasn't a soundtrack but actually a collection of songs sung by the character LV, was the first album I ever actually bought. And more recently I actually wrote to Jane Horrocks to tell her how much this film meant to me, receiving an autographed copy of the DVD sleeve with a nice note. But watching it as an adult, I find the experience incredibly different. The film on the surface is impossibly sweet, a completely serviceable British comedy that at the time teeters on the cusp of being a little too twee. And it's worth pointing out for any North American viewers that you may want to turn on the subtitles to help with some of the incredibly northern accents. At the best of times it's a tricky one, and there's a lot of nuances that can take getting used to for non-Brits. Casual swearing, British references and colloquialisms such as the infectiously charming way they drop the word the from sentences.
Speaking of start, you don't know nothing about electricity, do you? Only the wires of my own's crackling up on there.
No, we're just phone boys, us.
Regardless of that, the small number of characters in this story will no doubt be relatable to anyone with even the slightest ounce of a working class background. LV's mother Mari, the pastor prime man-eater played deftly by BAFTA-winning actress Brenda Blethyn, is like an amalgamation of basically every female member of my family I knew growing up in a working class city in England, though slightly more mean-spirited. Living in her death-trap house that was once a record shop owned by LV's father, Mari is charismatic and likeable in spite of, or maybe because, she wears her flaws on her sleeve and doesn't really care what people think of her. She's the polar opposite of LV, a fact that's lost on none of the characters, and as we learn throughout, is most likely the cause of LV's father's early death. Jim Broadbent is excellent as the obliviously talentless club owner Mr. Boo, and a young Ewan McGregor steps in as what seems to be a romantic lead that is more a kind of mirror to LV. Billy is a shy phone repairman who can't help putting his foot in his mouth. Billy seems to enjoy his own company, but unlike LV is more well equipped to deal with the challenges of the outside world, grounded by his hobby of keeping homing pigeons. Billy essentially is LV if she just got out more and tried to learn more about the world in which she lives. But more about that later. If there's one major flaw with the characters of this film, it will be that Billy does seem somewhat underwritten, and is really more of a guiding voice to LV rather than a full romantic lead. But I think in this case that's kind of the point. The film moves at a good pace with engaging and naturalistic dialogue and comedy, which keeps the talents of LV pretty hush-hush until we get to see the full showstopper in which she lets loose of her big band vocals. But if you're watching the movie expecting a song-a-minute jukebox musical, or even a Sister Act-esque comedy with musical numbers scattered throughout, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And this is also where Little Voice stands apart on its own. While most films of this sort would have the big song and dance number as the triumphant finale, an emancipation of LV from her crippling shyness, The fact is, there's actually an underlying darkness to what we're actually seeing, and while yes, the story does seem to revolve around Little Voice, a gifted and reclusive singer, as an adult I realise that this really isn't her story at all. LV is actually a MacGuffin for the rest of the cast, in particular the story's real main character, Ray Say, a seemingly charming promoter that never quite made it to the big time.
Alright. Ta-da! I'll have a cup of tea.
It's clear from the outset that Ray thinks of himself as something of a big fish trapped in a small pond, and we're introduced to him by a gushing Mari as a kind of local Lothario that she immediately becomes besotted with. Of course, being played by Michael Caine, charm is something that oozes naturally. He plays the game, happy to chase the girls each night as he drunkenly accepts any invitation for sex, but deep down is a deeply broken man with a desire to succeed. It doesn't take long during his fling with Mari before he realises that she has a gifted singer living upstairs in her house, and the very next morning he offers to make her breakfast. And here's where it gets interesting. I remember watching this scene as a kid and thinking that Ray seemed like a really nice guy with a genuine desire to help LV fulfill her potential, and judging by reviews of the movie from its original release, it seems others did too, and were surprised when Ray lashes out in the film's third act when things don't go his way. But in retrospect, I watch it and see the absolute mastery of Caine's performance. Basically everything he says and does is a barefaced lie, a scheme expertly plotted to groom LV into helping him achieve his dreams.
I wouldn't give one of these to just anyone, you know.
The fact is that Ray was always the real star and the real villain combined. The story is his, the story of a sleazy wannabe hotshot agent that will stop at nothing to exploit LV for personal gain. Though it's never expressly stated, it becomes clear throughout the film that Little Voice is either borderline mentally challenged or suffering from PTSD and depression due to the devastating loss of her father, her one true friend that shared interests and shared his love, only to be driven into an early grave from the excesses and abuse from his wife Mari. There's even some evidence to suggest that LV was abused and physically beaten by Mari in her youth, although that could be up for debate. Little Voice is deathly afraid of the outside world. At the very least she's agoraphobic and finds it almost impossible to talk to others. She seems to have almost no social skills whatsoever, locking herself in her room almost exclusively, where she constantly pines away over the memory of her father and even having visions of him visiting her. She seems to have no ability to read the severity of any situation and literally goes into a fugue-like state when Ray breaks his promise and tries to force her into performing a second show against her will. But therein lies the exploitative nature of Ray Say, a man that will stop at nothing to make a name for himself whether LV's on board or not. Ray pours all the money he has into producing LV's debut performance at Boo's nightclub, and the resounding success of the show just fuels his ego in a way that sends him into a cataclysmic rampage of self-congratulations, in which he leaves everyone behind him in the dust as he burns bridges and cuts ties with the little people, until it all comes to a head during a confrontation with Mari, in which he says some of the most horrendous things imaginable.
Do you think I don't have birds I go to? Don't you think it's like putting my face in flowers after you? You've had it, Mari.
And this is what I was saying about how the triumphant climax of the film isn't really the climax at all. Ultimately, LV doesn't want to sing in public, she doesn't want to be a star, and she definitely doesn't want to take Ray and her mother to a victorious life of fame and fortune. LV just wants to make her father proud and listen to her records. When Ray finally lets his mask drop and confronts LV about this, going so far as to slapping her out of frustration, LV does the only thing that her underdeveloped mind knows how to do, which is completely check out and let the other side take over, nearly killing Ray in the process in a scene which is surprisingly dark and effectively shot. In fact, it's such a dark and out of left field reaction it can seem quite jarring to a new viewer, and I guess maybe it does seem a little uneven, but personally for me it's an aspect of the film that makes me admire it more in hindsight. Essentially, Ray seeing this side of LV and his opportunity literally going up in flames was shown the real climax of the film, which is the fall of Ray Say. That moment where all his chickens come home to roost and he goes on a hilarious and heartbreaking song-a-log, in front of the entire town in a performance that is, in my opinion, the centerpiece of the film.
We then say goodbye, good bye. You won't be seeing rainbows anymore.
You could argue just as strongly that this defeat is akin to LV and Mari vanquishing the film's protagonist in a standard hero's journey structure, but LV is such a passive character that I still think Ray is a tragic and doomed anti-hero. Either way, this final stage of LV's story, where she's forced to do something new and gets snapped out of her own personal bubble, whether you think LV has Asperger's or PTSD is essentially irrelevant in terms of story. Because what is obvious is that LV is a disturbed girl who finds a catharsis in being able to stand up to bullies like Ray and Mari, and is left with a resolution that is satisfying and shows a glimmer of hope for both Little Voice and Billy. It's a story where not everyone gets what they want, but in Little Voice's case, it's the best thing for her. So that's Little Voice, a fantastic British film with a little bit more to it than meets the eye. I highly recommend watching it if you can find it somewhere. If you're living outside the UK, then you'll probably have to watch it on some kind of streaming site unless you've got a multi-region DVD player, because physical copies are pretty much non-existent at the moment. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe to help the algorithm along. See you next time!